This is Fred Ricciani of TSC News. I have right here on the line two very special guests. I have Art Davie, the man that started it all, the co-founder of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, along with his co-author and current Bellator MMA commentator, Sean Wheelock, the authors of Is This Legal? The best-selling book that, believe it or not, people thought wouldn't sell, which shocks the heck out of me. We'll talk about that and much, much more. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us tonight on TSC News.
It's really a pleasure to be here, Fred, with you on Sports Courier.
Yeah, thank you, Fred. Thank you for having Art and myself on.
Why was this the right time to put out a book?
Well, it's been more than 20 years, and I think if I had sat down to write this book 10 years ago, in a way it might have been a little premature. The Zupa was really just beginning at that time and just getting cranking up their operation. And now with their success, I think that it's been a corroboration of what I did more than 20 years ago. So I think it was about time for me to take a little bit of a back. And my friendship with Sean really precipitated it. A couple of years ago, we talked, and he said, we really got to do this book because this is the story that has to be told. This was the big bang of MMA, just like the big bang in the universe. Everything in that first event shaped what came later, just as it did in the cosmos. So I really owe the genesis of the book to Sean grabbing me by the collar and saying, "Hey, Art, let's get going."
And Sean, why were you the right man to team up with Mr. Davie here?
Well, one of the reasons is I'm one of those people that actually bought UFC 1, and I'll amend that. My mom bought UFC 1. I was still a kid. I was still living at home. It was $14.95, and my mom was my benefactor. As I write in the afterword of our book, Is This Legal? Of anything that I wanted to buy. She was so supportive, boxing, pro wrestling, and I saw this oddball thing, and I saw a poster at my Gold's Gym in Kansas City, where I write in the book I was the youngest and scrawniest and least likely member of a Gold's Gym, and I think that was pretty accurate. And I had just joined, actually, and I saw this poster, and I didn't know what it was, and I thought, well, maybe this is real. It's probably a pro wrestling work, but my mom had no hesitation in paying the $14.95, and I was absolutely mesmerized, and I knew that was something that I wanted to be part of my life. And in writing this book, my fan came out. Art and I writing this together, Art is one of the best storytellers I've ever met in my life. He's a world-class storyteller, but part of my job as his co-author was to jog his memory. Why Denver? Why Taylor Tooley? Why Royce Gracie and not Hicks and Gracie? Why was it an octagon? Why was John Milius involved? That peppered Art with literally hundreds and hundreds of questions, making him think and relive this period of his life, 1989 through 1993, and reliving it in chronological order. But before I'm a Bellator commentator, I am a super hardcore MMA nut, and so it was so much fun for me to write this book with Art because I got my questions answered, and now we answer them for the world.
Now, it's no secret you're a huge pro wrestling fan, but when your mother ordered that UFC pay-per-view for you, was it hard to convince her to allow you to order another one?
No, not at all, actually, and I was just so mesmerized. I'm sure I would have scraped up the money had it come to that, but it didn't come to that, thankfully. And I just gave my mom a car not too long ago, so hopefully I'm repaying her in kind. But I'll tell you what, Fred, something I find interesting. I know 4 other people, and I write about this in the book in my afterword, in our book together with Art. But in the afterword, I write as myself and my experience with watching the first UFC. And I talk about I know 4 other people who watched UFC 1 live, and all of us now work in the MMA industry. One of those people is Ben Saunders, the great fighter of UFC, Bellator. Ben Saunders was an 8 or 9-year-old kid watching that. Everybody that I know, that group of us, we've all gone into working in mixed martial arts as a career. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that's all thanks to Art. It was a revolution. It was an absolute revolution that played out with absolutely no warning, no fanfare, and it just appeared on our television screens across the U.S. and Canada, and it shaped a lot of young lives.
Absolutely. Now, you were telling me off the air, and we touched on it a little bit earlier, there were publishers that thought this book wouldn't sell. And here's what I don't understand. The UFC's very popular. Bellator's popular. MMA is now a global sport. This is a book written by the co-founder of the UFC. I mean, you would think that's the selling point right there. Boom, let's get this book published. Why'd you guys run into so much trouble the last couple of years?
Art, you want to take this?
Fred, I think that number one, if you look at the history of MMA books, nobody's really sold more than 60,000. So I think in the universe of books, sports bios, etc., there might have been a feeling on the part of publishers that perhaps MMA fans wouldn't buy a book or don't buy books, or they don't buy a lot of books. So I think that there was that prejudice that we had to deal with. And, I think in all fairness, when you look at what's happened since the book was introduced July 1st, our Kindle sales, our ebook sales have really soared, and the hardcover book sales have done well, too. But, I think a lot of our fans are young or younger, and I think that the ebook form does real well with them. I think it's convenient. They're used to enjoying content on smartphones and pads. And I think that this is a very accessible way for them to get into this book. And I think that if we did an audio version of the book, I think that would also sell well. Also, so I think that was part of it, Fred.
Now, were you worried about getting any negative feedback? Because there has been, not naming names, but there has been some revisionist history when it comes to telling the story of mixed martial arts and how it became big in the United States.
Well, I'll jump in on this if I can, Fred. So one thing that Art and I talked about early on is we're going to tell the truth. We have 20 years of history, and thankfully for our project, for me as Art's co-writer, not only does he have an amazing memory, he is a prolific saver, and we've reprinted that in the book. You see Art's original facts to Semaphore Entertainment Group. There's some revisionist history that said Semaphore Entertainment Group came looking for Art Davie, but lo and behold, in our book, there is the fax. It's basically a cold fax. If people remember fax machines, Art just typed up a fax and he sent it to Semaphore Entertainment Group, introducing himself, so it wasn't the other way around. The contracts with Horion Gracie, everything is detailed. And, I almost looked at this like follow the evidence. If you follow the evidence, it all leads back to Art Davie. Did Hicks and Gracie find Art? No, actually, Art found Hickson and found Horion and found the whole Gracie family. Did John Milius find Art? No, actually, Art found John Milius. Did Campbell McLaren and Bob Meyerowitz and the people at Semaphore Entertainment Group find Art? No, actually, it was the other way around. Art conceived of this, and we write about it in the book, for an advertising client when he was an ad man in the 1980s, back in the fall of 1989. This was building and bubbling for Art Davie for 4 years, and it's all in the book. We literally have a number of smoking guns because we have the documentation. We put in contracts, we name names, there are faxes, there are letters, there are correspondence, and nobody Art has come and challenged this. People have said, wow, this is the real story. You can argue with opinion, you can't argue with facts, and our book is all about the facts, and we have the evidence to back it up. We have the documentation.
Well said, well said. Now, Art, back in the day with the UFC, you had a few fighters that not only were in MMA, but dabbled in pro wrestling. And one guy who's going to be debuting for Bellator in a few weeks is Bobby Lashley, who's been going pretty hard in Impact Wrestling. He's going to be fighting in Bellator MMA. Do you think these days, given how hard it is just to prepare for a fight, and of course, a pro wrestling career, that it's, I don't want to say impossible, but a pretty tough task to juggle both careers?
Well, I think it's tough to juggle both careers. I think both of them now demand, it's like being a violinist. If you want to be a great violinist, you need to be practicing for about 8 years, I've been told. So, that's true for a pro boxer. I think it's true now for a pro MMA fighter, that you need a certain amount of time and grade. And, to be a successful professional wrestler, to master the moves, to master the entire game takes really almost an equivalent amount of time. So I think that it's possible. There are Bo Jacksons out there that can juggle two sports, but they tend to be the exception than the rule.
Yeah, and Sean, I'll just add to that if I could get your thoughts, because I was just at the most recent Impact Wrestling taping in New York City. I saw Bobby Lashley have a knockdown, drag-out war with Bobby Roode. I mean, he took this crazy bump on the outside, and I'm thinking, this is such a great match. And then in the back of my mind, I'm remembering, wait a minute. He's got a fight in a couple weeks.
Yeah. Well, you know, and as you see in the book, and look, Art knows pro wrestling history. I'm a huge pro wrestling fan. I grew up going to Central States matches when in the territory days and the NWA days, late 70s, early and mid 1980s. And, you know, one thing that comes clear in the book was how Art was looking at what they were doing in Japan, the strong style movement, the Puroresu movement. And that's where Ken Shamrock came out of. And Art, if you want to take this, but Ken Shamrock, until 2 days before the first UFC, kind of thought that it was going to be a hard work. He was going to be working stiff. It was going to be predetermined, but he was going to be selling it like Japanese strong style. And Art had to tell Ken Shamrock, no, this is actually all real. There's no work here. There's no hard work. There's no strong style. This is the real deal, brother. But, you know, if you look at what was happening in Japan around the time that Art was creating the UFC, to me, that's not mixed martial arts. Art Davie is not only the creator of the UFC, he is the inventor of the sport that we now know as mixed martial arts. Pancrase, Shuto, rings, New Japan, Puroresu, strong style, that wasn't mixed martial arts. There were elements of works in there. Sometimes they were shoots, sometimes they were legitimate, but a lot of times there were elements of works. There was sort of that gray area, that blurred lines. And so Art was well aware of what was going on in professional wrestling. And Art, I think it's fascinating, too, and we write about this in the book, that all of your attention was really towards Japan because you didn't think that the modern the modern pro wrestling stars of the early 90s, Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair, really knew how to fight, really knew how to shoot, but you could find those in people like Ken Shamrock or when you went after Bart Vale.
Well, you know, I was the one who eventually brought in a pro wrestler. Rick Bassman, one of the Huntington Beach Bad Boys, brought me, Count Ludwig Borga, who eventually ran for the Senate in Finland, and became a senator before he passed away. And he was a pro wrestler. We brought him in, matched him with Randy Couture. And I had been trying earlier on to get Meng, who I heard through the pro wrestling community was a legitimate tough guy who could fight inside a wrestling ring or for real outside of it. So the commitment early on from the first UFC, Fred, was for me to find the best that I could find, and going from A to Z. That's why I had a sumo wrestler in the first event. That's why I had a pro boxer. That's why by UFC 2 I had somebody from Penjak Salat. I was always looking for what I thought the fans would consider a good fight and a good fighter. And finally I brought in, basically a brawler, a pitch fighter, when it came to Tank Abbott. I wanted to provide the fans with the best fighting talent that was out there. But if I thought that I could find a pro wrestler, who could do the job, I was always looking for him. But after I brought in that one wrestler and matched him up against Randy Couture, I knew that those guys would have a harder time. Now, admittedly, the Olympic-style wrestlers, the Dan Severins, the Mark Colemans, the Mark Kerrs, Randy Couture, Kevin Jackson, Mark Schultz, did much better and brought a very important element to MMA. You needed to be able to know how to grapple like a wrestler, and you needed to know how to sprawl, and you still do today.
There were a lot of legit tough guys back in the day, in the old days of UFC, and nutrition ain't what it is today. The training methods certainly are what they are today, but, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Art, I feel like more guys are getting hurt these days in training before they even get to a fight, and I get that you got to prepare hard and prepare for the worst, hope for the best. But I feel like a lot of these guys, especially in the last 3 years, have just been dropping like flies before they even get to the cage.
Well, back in the day, we used to ascribe that kind of brittleness to vitamin S. That's what we called it, vitamin S. If you take a lot of vitamin S, it tends to set you up for some ligament and even some bone vulnerability. So, could it be today that more than ever, you see cyclists today, tennis players, baseball players, boxers, and MMA athletes using those substances? If that's the case, they derive some benefit, but it also comes with a package of liability as well.
That is true. Now, do you think that there are too many fighters these days that just? I mean, back in the day, the guys had some game plans, but I feel like these days, and not naming names, but certain coaches, I feel like sometimes over strategize. Do you think that's hurting the sport at all, or only helping it?
Go ahead, Sean. Why don't you jump on that?
Well, I think if you look at what Art did with UFC 1 and then all of the early UFCs, guys were literally straight out of their discipline. And so they had to implement their game plan because that was all they had. There was no plan B. If you came out of Kung Fu, you better have your Kung Fu working or it was going to be a bad night. Same if you were a wrestler. Same if you were a jiu-jitsu practitioner or you came out of judo, or like Art Jimmerson and Melton Bowen, you came out of professional boxing. I think now with the way the sport has evolved in 20 and a half years, that everybody trains everything, it's almost a decathlon to me. And that's how I describe MMA to people who don't know MMA. I say this is the decathlon. You don't have to be outstanding at anything, but you're going to be really good at everything. And so I think with that, there's a certain sameness to the sport, and it's not a criticism, it's just an observation. You don't have, and we'll talk about it on Bellator, sometimes fights feel like old school or throwback. They say that on the UFC as well. But you're never going to have Art Jimmerson versus Royce Gracie again. You're not putting the toothpaste back in that tube. It's just the way that the sport has evolved. Walk into any legitimate MMA gym in the country, they're going to have a wrestling coach, they're going to have a boxing coach, they're going to have a Muay Thai coach, and they're going to have a wrestling coach. That's just the way it is. Art Jimmerson showing up, and the story's in the book where he didn't have gloves, and then Art had to send his kid brother Matthew to a sporting goods store in the Denver suburb of Arvada, literally a couple of hours before UFC 1, to buy boxing gloves off the shelf. And then Jimmerson decides he's only going to wear one glove against Royce Gracie. That, to me, Fred, really is like showing up at Wimbledon with a baseball bat and saying, oh, which court am I playing on? It's just a complete fundamental lack of understanding of what you're getting yourself into. And I think that persisted really through the early UFCs, but you just don't see that anymore. The sport has just evolved to that point where you're not going to have that mystery surrounding it. Everyone's going to at least know a little bit of something. And
how ironic, Art Jimmerson, at least as of a couple years ago, was actually a boxing trainer at a local UFC gym.
Which Art Davie and I, we laugh about all the time, don't we, Art? It's funny how the world has turned, that he now, trains at a UFC gym. He still has never fully understood, and Fred, you've read the book, and for your listeners, the story is in there about the one glove. And Art, you said it best. You still don't know what was in Art Jimmerson's head 20 and a half years later.
And the funny thing is, a couple years ago, he almost got a rematch with Royce Gracie. I know Royce was campaigning when UFC returned to Brazil for the first time in over 10 years. I think it was, a couple years ago, 2012. And that fight almost happened, which would have been crazy. Fortunately, it didn't, but can't have everything in life, right? And Art, I'm just wondering, do you still train these days at all?
No, I don't train with jiu-jitsu any longer, but I am in the gym every other day, doing the machines, doing the treadmill, and keeping myself in shape at age 67. But no longer any jiu-jitsu. I think I've passed the point where I need to be rolling with guys who weigh 190 and are 18 years old.
Well, Fred, let me jump in on this because, as I said, not only are Art Davie and I extremely close friends. I mean, Art's truly one of the most important people in my life, and I don't say that lightly. We're incredibly close. I mean, his friendship, our relationship means so much to me. And asking him questions as I co-authored this book and told Art's story, I found out so much. And what fascinated me, one, I didn't know that he was a Marine, and he served with valor and distinction, was a medal recipient in the Vietnam War. But also then, into his 40s, and in part trying to understand fighting, trying to gain the favor of Rorion Gracie. This just wasn't thrown together the first UFC. Art was a student under Rorion, and then he was passed down to Royce Gracie. Art became a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm sure a lot of your listeners have trained in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. They don't just hand those belts out. Art had to work and work to get that blue belt. And Art, you were well into your 40s by that point, and I find that absolutely fascinating. Someone with no grappling background whatsoever. Art had boxed as a kid, but to work that hard, be that committed to earn his blue belt at the Gracie Academy in Torrance, California.
And
Yep.
Fred, I had passed the 36 lessons, and now I was learning to combine the elements into some real defense. And training with Hoyler, he was then putting boxing gloves on, and he would come into that small room, and he would say, okay, I'm going to hit you. I'm going to try to knock you out. It's up to you to stop me. So we did that, and that was great training for me. One night, though, he caught me with a right hook on my left side and broke my ribs. But it was an accident, and it was just part of the kind of training that I was undergoing at that point. I was 45, and I was spending at least one visit a week at the chiropractor and 2 visits a week at the Jiu-Jitsu Academy.
Hey, it was time well spent. Ended up working out in the end. What are your thoughts today on the current state of MMA? UFC, just a few months back, wow, almost a year now, in November 2013, celebrated its 20-year anniversary. Do you feel like the sport is on its way up? Do you feel like it's kind of plateaued, due to some oversaturation? What are your thoughts on the state of the sport right now?
Well, I think I think they've done a great job over at Zuffa developing the world market. They've done 15 events in Brazil, 15 events in the United Kingdom. They've done events in China, Singapore, the Middle East, Dublin, Germany. I think that they have done a great job of developing the brand in North America. They've done 15 events in Canada, 16 events in Canada. So they've done a tremendous job of advancing the brand. Their success in securing a 7-year deal with Fox Television, one of the broadcast networks, certainly brought the UFC into the mainstream in a way that reminded everyone that this sport had arrived. And I can only imagine what it's going to be in the next 20 years. I think they've done a good job. I think they've got their hands full trying to create stars. It's always a major effort to find people not only who can fight, but who the fans get excited about. And I think the UFC has done a good job of moving this sport into the mainstream. I give them a lot of credit.
Do you think they're running a few too many shows, though? I mean, I think this year, by the end of the year, it's probably around like 50 events, maybe more. I mean, granted, not all of them are supposedly airing on North America. Some are on Fight Pass, some are for international markets. Do you think it's a case where they could run too many fights and dilute their brand, or long term, do you think it's going to help them create new stars worldwide?
I think overall it's going to continue to help them grow because they'll be, again, they are the premier destination for MMA fighters. And if you're the leading brand and you up the number of shows that you have, you're in effect saying to the fans, we're the leading brand. So it's when it comes down to where to put your money and your time, you're going to give it to us. That's what the leader does. You continue to expand into the market. I think the smarter guys in MMA, in the sport, in the business, know that if they were in the same position, that's what they do. Quite frankly, if I were in that position, that's what I would do. I think they're going to 100 shows a year. I think that's where they're headed. And when I was interviewed by Frank Trigg recently, he brought up that exact question to me. That's where he thinks it's going.
And you think that is a good thing? That's only going to be a positive long term.
Well, I got to tell you something. When you compare what has happened with the fact that at one time it was banned and it was illegal, and now if you're an MMA fan, you have a buffet table full of great MMA to choose from. I think that it's never been better for the fans. And can the fans get too much of a good thing? They'll choose. That's what customers do. That's what buyers do. They decide what they want to buy and what they want to enjoy. But it's better to have more on the table rather than less. So I think overall, again, if you're an MMA fighter and you want to fight, the fact that the UFC has 500 fighters under contract is a goal that you have to be one of those 500. What if they only had 100 fighters under contract? What about if they had 1,000? I think the UFC is going to continue to expand, and maybe the naysayers and some of the critics might be a little down on that. But if you're the leading brand, you intend to put your brand out there in a way that the customer, if he has a choice, will choose the leading brand, whether it's Coca-Cola or it's Apple.
Well said, sir. Well, before I let you guys go, where can fans find you guys online as well as the awesome book?
Yeah, we appreciate it very much, and Fred, great questions. And then I will say, I do think that I'm trying to do my part in unifying the MMA world. I just have to throw this in. It was such a big thrill for me when Art was my guest at our most recent Bellator on Spike in Temecula, California, Southern California, on July 25th. And to be able to walk around and introduce Art to the fighters, to Scott Coker, to Kevin Kay, the president of Spike, all the executives. It was a big thing. And I know a few people on Twitter were surprised when we showed Art, and I mentioned that there's the founder of the UFC here at Bellator. But, I, for one, and Art, I think you probably agree with this, I just don't see us all in competition with each other. To me, one does well, we all do well. I mean, perhaps our competition is other sports that we still need to find more fans. I don't want to go off on a rant here, but I think when we say, well, it's either got to be UFC or Bellator or World Series of Fighting or ONE FC or MFC or Titan, that's saying that there is a finite number of MMA fans and we're cannibalizing each other, and I don't believe that. I think there are still millions and millions of people in North America, let alone the world, who have yet to embrace MMA, and those are the people we have to go for. If the UFC has success, fantastic. Yes, Art.
Sean, let me make that point also with Fred, is that our competition in MMA is other things in entertainment.
Right.
And that's a pretty broad cross-section right there.
Yeah.
It's our job to attract the fans that have not maybe come over to MMA and to show them what an exciting, thrilling sport this is. This is the king of sport. It was meant to be, and it has become so.
Yep, beautifully said, Art. And obviously I want Bellator to be as big and successful as possible, and I don't think the success of the UFC or ONE FC or World Series of Fighting or a local AMI show, which are National Guard Armory, somehow takes away our success. Again, that's saying there's a finite amount of fans out there, and obviously I want Bellator to be big, I want us to be huge, but I want the sport to be huge, and that's one thing I say to people is, be a fan of the sport, embrace it all. Watch everything you can, but watch all the MMA, and then go and support your local shows, the pro and the AMI shows. Be a fan of the sport. I don't think it's healthy that we have to have these rivalries. I don't look at college basketball fans saying, I'm only watching the Big 12. I'm not going to watch anybody else. You must be disloyal if you watch the Pac-12 or the ACC. You can have your favorite teams and your favorite conferences, but be a fan of the sport. And so hopefully our book, we're trying to bridge the gap of Bellator and the UFC, and I'll say everybody at Bellator at Spike has been so incredibly supportive and gracious of our book and so welcoming of Art coming down and sitting front row cage side. And Art, you can speak to this. Everyone at the UFC, starting with Dana White, they've been incredibly generous, incredibly gracious with our book.
Very much so, and it really was a thrill on July 25th for me to be stateside at the Bellator show in Temecula. I had renewed my friendship with Scott Coker that goes back virtually 12 years, and I think that he's going to be a real big factor in helping to take Bellator to the next level. And that's important for MMA because I agree with Sean. We are all about, when you think about it, getting MMA over when it comes to in the entertainment field, getting these fans to understand that we are a viable alternative as an entertainment property. The sport itself needs to grow, and it will.
Well said, gentlemen. Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to.
And we have to plug the book. You set us up.
Yeah, I was just gonna say. You mentioned Scott Coker. Definitely look forward to seeing what he's doing. I mean, so far so good. I mean, you guys just signed Julia Budd and one of my personal favorites, Marloes Kunin. I mean, both are very exciting fighters. Well. So yeah, definitely looking forward to those shows, man. This fall.
Yeah, and Scott Coker, all credit to Bjorn Rebney, and I owe Bjorn a lot. He brought Jimmy Smith and me over as a team from M1, where we had already been for a couple of years in 12 countries and a lot of shows. But, kind of in the background in MMA, and all credit to Bjorn Rebney bringing us over. It's an evolution, and Scott Coker, I knew him from Strikeforce, a huge fan of Scott Coker personally and professionally, and seeing him in Temecula, California. What a gentleman, what a class act. And that's someone in MMA that everybody likes, kind of like Art Davie. Nobody says anything bad about Art, and nobody says anything bad about Scott Coker. And it was fun for me to see the guys together. So I'm so incredibly optimistic for Bellator and our direction moving forward, and I'm incredibly optimistic about our sport of mixed martial arts. So now I guess we get the plug, right, Fred?
Right. Well, fans can follow you on Twitter at Art Davie, at Sean Wheelock, and I believe the website is thislegalthebook.com?
That's right, and there is some documents that we just simply couldn't fit in. It's a 284-page book, but there were some things like Art's original business plan, 26 pages, the contract with Semaphore Entertainment Group. For people like Jimmy Smith and me, the absolute hardcores of the hardcores that want to look at a 26-page fighter contract, things like that no publisher in his right mind would ever put in our book. So all the minutia, Art blogs on there, ways to contact Art for media, and you can buy the book at bookstores across the U.S. and Canada, including Barnes & Noble in the United States, or you can go online right now on Amazon.com. It's Is This Legal? The Inside Story of the First UFC from the Man Who Created It by Art Davie, with me, Sean Wheelock, and you can download it on your Kindle, or you can get the hardback cover right now. But Amazon, I think, is probably the best and probably the most cost-effective way to buy our book.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, I really do appreciate the time. Love the book. Love talking to you guys tonight. Hopefully, we could do it again sometime. Mr. Davie, thank you so much for everything you've done for the sport. Sean, thank you as well for the great read. Just tremendous. Guys, buy the book. Is This Legal? In stores now. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, Fred.
Thanks, Fred.